Church, we continue in our series today, The Power to Choose. And today we're going to be focused on choosing faith over fear. Fear, as we probably all know, is a real thing that we all struggle with. Some maybe more than others in certain areas or categories, but we all struggle with fear. If I was to ask you, what are your top 3 fears, and you were to make a list, what would you put at the top there? What would your top 3 fears in life be? We all have them. In fact, today we're going to see the disciples had a fear that they were unaware of, and they wouldn't have put it on their top 3 list. I mean, these were men that were familiar with being in boats and out on the water and even in the midst of storms, but they were going to face a storm in the text today that literally had them fearful of dying. So I say that because in your top 3, it may not be even the fear that the Lord is going to reveal that you have that's going to bring you to a point of understanding of who He is. But He has a way of doing that. And so we want to understand that fully. And so when these things happen in our life, literally, sometimes out of the blue. You ever heard that saying? That just came out of the blue. You know what that means? It means on a clear blue day, no clouds in the sky, all of a sudden a storm can come up and lightning can strike. That's where that saying came from. Out of the clear blue. That's what happened for the disciples on that particular night in the boat with Jesus. Out of the blue came a storm that brought them into complete, utter fear of dying. And Jesus knew exactly what He was doing, because He was doing a greater work in them. And the same is true for us. But I want us to understand that, because some of us here today are going through some storms. Some of us here today are facing some things that came into our lives out of the blue, and God is working in them, and we need to understand that. So I want to talk about the 5 stages to confronting fear and choosing faith. Because if you stay in your fear, it will paralyze your life. It will steal life from you. It will steal the life of those around you. It is such a damaging thing. But we must choose faith as believers. And here are 5 stages to confronting fear and choosing faith. And the first comes in verses 18 through 23, which puts our text into its context, a greater understanding of the questions that were taking place in regards to following Jesus. There were those who were saying, hey, I'll follow you. I'm going to follow you wherever you go, whatever. And Jesus has to bring some clarity to that. And the disciples, even themselves, had to have some clarity in understanding that. So let's see the call to follow, verses 18 through 23. When Jesus saw the crowd around Him, He gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. When a teacher of the law came to Him and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus replied, Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay His head. Now, interestingly enough, we're going to see it just be, minutes to hours later that He would lay His head on a boat, on a pillow, on a cushion in the stern of the boat. He would go to sleep. But now verse 21, another disciple said to Him, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. But Jesus told him, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. Then He got into the boat, and the disciples, they followed Him. Now, Jesus gives this order to cross to the other side. Now, what's interesting about that is He is not staying in one place, accelerating His popularity so that He can gain a following. He is going from place to place so that He can share the gospel with all that need to hear it. Yes, He was on the move, but He's not interested in creating a movement of popularity. And as He is moving along, people are saying, hey, I want to follow Him. They were stirred with curiosity and interest, and his ministry of teaching and the miracle ministry, it was polarizing in the community. And people were drawn to him, and they were saying, hey, teacher of the law. He said, I'll follow you. And another disciple says, hey, I'll follow you. And they're all wanting to be a part, but Jesus is having to bring clarity to what it means to follow. And we need that same clarity in our lives and in our culture. And so following needed this clarification because people thought, I'll just be a part of this next great movement. The teacher of the law is the first that is mentioned here. And he says, hey, I'll follow you. And Jesus says, well, you know what? I have no place to lay my head. You need to understand that. Basically saying, I don't have a home, I don't have a castle or a temple. I don't have any type of structure or place to call home for my ministry. That is a home base or a headquarters. The world is my ministry. Wherever there are people, that's where he wanted to go. And he wanted this teacher of the law to understand that, because that was the understanding that Jesus knew that he needed. Secondly, there was a disciple, and he learned that following means now, not later. This disciple desired to return home and bury his father, which seems like an honorable thing, but all scholars believe that his father wasn't even close to death. He just wanted to return home and wait until his dad died. And then he would return and follow Jesus. And some believe that maybe he was waiting on an inheritance instead of doing the work of the Lord, the spiritual work. And this is why he responded, and he said, let the dead bury their own dead, which simply means that the spiritually dead care for the physically dead. And so he's bringing clarification to what it means to follow. It means now, and it means it's probably not what you think, in that they thought maybe he's going to, rise up and have a temple and a following and all of these things. And he said, no, you don't understand. And even the disciples themselves did not fully understand. Yet it says of the disciples that they got into the boat, not knowing where they would sleep or what they would do next. They immediately followed him. How many of you like to go on a trip and plan nothing? Michelle and I have been talking about this. She's such a great and amazing planner. She said, Mark, I just want to travel sometime and we have no plans. I said, it'll never happen. And she just smiled. She said, yeah, you're probably right. It's probably not going to happen. Most of us want to know the plan, right? We want to know where we're going, what we're doing, what's going to happen. But here the disciples get into the boat, not really knowing, but they immediately followed. Now, the reason we don't like that is we feel out of control. We don't know what's coming or if it's something we like or dislike. They're following and not fully knowing. What Jesus knew that they did not know is that to get into the boat with him was for him to do something in their lives to grow them spiritually. Did you know most of the time we do not know what it is that we need spiritually? If I said to myself, Mark, what do I need to grow spiritually? I probably don't know. Now, there may be some things the Lord has shown me that I need to work on. Okay, I'm working on those. But what I have found in life is this: the Lord knows what I need, and so he puts me in situations so that I can receive the growth that he knows that I need to accomplish his will. And the problem is, sometimes we're not okay with that, the unknown. But we've got to learn to be okay with that, because Jesus knows what's best for us to grow us, to become like him, to see him for who he is, and to fully trust him. It's what I like to call the boat life. That's where the real spiritual growth happens. When we immediately get into the boat and we go to the other side with him, and from point A to point B on the lake, he does the work in us that we need to have happen. But we don't even know how that happens until we first obey. When he says, come, follow me, get into the boat, come with me. That's the first step of obedience. The second and the third and the fourth step come as we see Jesus for who he is, and we learn to fully trust him as we go with him. That's very key to understand. Michelle and I have been talking recently just about some of the early ministries that God gave us. And we went to those ministries young and strong and vibrant, ready to change the world, and should never lose that spirit. But oftentimes we thought we were going to do something when God was waiting to do something in us. And not that we didn't do something for the Lord. I feel sure that God worked through us and our desire to serve Him. But my point is this, is that oftentimes what we think we're going to do, God is waiting to do something in us so we can do what He calls us to do. And that's what we have to be okay with. That's what the disciples had to learn. And I promise you, the disciples here early on were not the disciples in the book of Acts. They came to understand who Jesus was fully so they could trust Him fully as He was making them fishers of men. So this is the call to follow. Now, the second thing I want us to see in the 5 stages is this, is the crisis of uncertainty. Verse 24 says this, without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. You know, there's something about an earthquake that's very interesting to me. And I know we monitor for earthquakes and we have sensors and we know when those things are taking place. But typically, to me, an earthquake comes literally out of the blue, from nowhere, it seems. Now, you can get a tsunami warning, you can get a hurricane warning, tornado warning, even an ice storm warning, a firestorm warning. Those all tend to come with warnings, but earthquakes just seem to happen. And that's what happened this night on this boat on the lake as the furious storm came without warning. It caught the disciples off guard. They were immediately overwhelmed with the fear of dying. There was nothing they could do. There was no recourse. There was nothing they could bond together and do as a team. There was nothing. It was just desperation right before death in their minds. The waves were sweeping over the boat. The only certain thing was that they were going to die if something didn't change. Everyone was frantically concerned and doing what they could to stay alive, except for one, Jesus. Where was He? Where's Jesus? Where's Jesus? Surely the man who does the miracles can do something. Somebody find Him. Where is He? I don't see Him out here. Where is He? He must be below deck. And in a frantic search for Jesus, they found Him below deck, enjoying a good night's sleep. If He wore a sleep tracking device on His wrist, His sleep score would have been 100. You know, isn't it interesting that we go through seasons of life where we experience no storms, no crises, and we feel so sufficient in our abilities to serve the Lord and handle life. And then along comes a storm literally out of the blue. The kind where Jesus said, "Come follow me," and He allows the storm. Literally, don't miss this, this storm came in the disciples' obedience to follow. Take, for example, Jonah in the Old Testament. The storm he experienced was a result of his disobedience. This storm was a result of the disciples' obedience. And when the Lord was working, it happened so quickly. Things happen in our lives that we don't plan on. Things God sends our way. We can go one day from having a great day to despairing about how literally to survive the day. Have you ever been there? You're having a great day and then all of a sudden it's like, what in the world? How am I going to make it through this day? We can go from being healthy to getting a report that something's wrong with us and we're unhealthy. We can go from having a job to losing a job. Life is about ups and downs, things that come that we cannot understand. These are called uncertainties of life. And when they come, I believe one of the things they do is they show us we are not as wise and powerful as we think we are. And for sure, they should send us to Jesus. And in the midst of this, we should know that Jesus cares for us. So what we see here is the uncertainty of what Jesus allowed in their life. Now that's important to grasp, because oftentimes in our uncertainties we cry out to God and we go, God, you don't care. You don't care about me, but that was not true. Let's see the cry for help that comes in verse 25. And it says the disciples went and woke him up saying, Lord, save us. We are going to drown. Now, I've been told that there are some people, like myself, it's not very wise to wake them up when they're in a deep sleep. But that didn't matter for the disciples. This was an emergency. This was a life or death situation. Wake up, Jesus. This is not some gentle nudge. This is a frantic cry for help. Lord, save us. We are going to drown. In fact, in the parallel passage over in Mark 4, verse 38, they accuse Jesus of not even caring that they're going to die. So they're waking him up and saying, you don't even care. We're about to die. What are you doing down here sleeping? You need to do something. I wonder how often we've accused Jesus of not caring. Probably more than I want to admit that I've said things to him and sideways comments in my prayers that would indicate he doesn't care, but he does. Isn't it interesting that we never question the Lord's compassion when things are going well? But you know what? God's compassion is not measured by our circumstances. He's consistent all the time. Are you trusting him? That's ultimately the question we're going to get back to today. Are we really trusting him with our lives? The disciples would learn that Jesus is all that they need. Have you heard the saying that says, you'll never know if Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have? But when Jesus is all you'll have, then you will know that Jesus is all you need. And that's where real contentment comes from. When you can trust him with the things in your past, the things in your present, and the things that are to come. And you're resting in who he is, not what you can control and what you can do. And that's what the disciples needed to learn. You know, it's interesting, in the midst of this storm on that night, that was not the only storm that was taking place. Yes, the waves were crashing onto the boat. Yes, this little boat was about to sink, and they were certain of it. And these are brave, seaworthy men, but yet they are so fearful. But that wasn't the only storm. The real storm was taking place in their hearts. They were fearful. And I wonder what storm is raging in your heart and in my heart. I have storms that rage in my heart. And the only place that I can find peace in that regard is to go to the Lord in prayer and in his word and let him do a work in my life. And what I find is that the Lord shows me that he is adequate, he is faithful, he cares, and he is compassionate in who he is to handle the storm in my heart. And the question is, do you see him that way? Or do you just say you do, but not really? You say you trust him, but yet you go and you talk to other people about all the fears that are consuming you. Where do we completely switch over and completely trust him till this calm comes over our hearts? This is really the question that they had to answer. And Jesus wants them to answer it. And he brings a clarifying question, number 4. This is the first part of verse 26. And when they wake him up, and they shake him from his slumber, and they accuse him of not caring, and that they're about to die, he replies to them in this way. He says, you of little faith. Well, why are you so afraid? Why are you so afraid? What a great question. In the midst of your fear, have you ever asked yourself the question, why am I so afraid? What am I afraid of? Is it my reputation, of what other people are going to think? Am I afraid of the fact that I may not get what I want? May it be that I'm not going to be able to control the things I want? I don't know. What is it that causes our fear? What a great question. Why are you so afraid? Faith and fear, I want to tell you, can never coexist together. You just can't do it. Would you take a good piece of cheesecake and top it off with sardines? No, And you can't combine faith and fear either. They just don't, won't, and can't go together. I mean, you just can't do it. They're opposites. And our faith is little. He says, oh, you have little faith. And I'm telling you this, our faith is little when Jesus is little to us. Our faith is little when we see Jesus as limited. Our faith is little when our fears are greater than our faith in who Jesus is and what Jesus can do. You know, we may have fear in our own abilities, like, hey, I can't do this. I'm just not capable, and your limits. Okay, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Where the problem comes in is when I limit what Jesus can do, what He's willing to do, what He's capable of doing, what I'm going to trust Him to do, and then I put my inabilities on Him. That's where the real problem comes in. They were saying, we can't save ourselves, but somehow we think you can, but we're not sure you can, but we're going to wake you up to see if you will, and maybe you can, but we're not sure. We're full of fear. Wake up and at least try. It was little faith. It was not great faith. It was little faith. Jesus can do all things. But they weren't really sure that He could. Maybe He would. He'd done some other miracles, but they didn't really understand who Jesus was. And we fall in that boat as well. Oftentimes we say, well, I believe Jesus can do anything. And then we're over here fretting and fearful about everything. Or can He really do everything? Which one is it? And this is why He calls them out in little faith. This desperation, this cry of desperation was little faith. If they could have just remembered the centurion who had great faith. There is a difference. Both are faith, but one is great and one is little. We go through this cycle of saying we do believe, but in reality, we don't believe. We know it and we say it, but we still fret and we still try to control things, and we've never shifted from the little faith over to great faith. And it's a real problem. It's a real problem. And He calls them out and He says, why are you so afraid? You have little faith. He's really answering it. He gives them the answer. It's because of your little faith that you are afraid. But He's getting them to grapple with it and deal with understanding what's going on in the midst of this storm. And so they're thinking, okay, He didn't, what are we going to do here? Instead, He's trying to ask us why we're so scared. And then He gets up and He brings about this, what I call the captivating calm. Watch what happens next. Then He got up. Like, okay. And He rebuked the winds and the waves. And it was, and this is important, completely calm. Completely calm. Oftentimes the wind may stop immediately, but if you jump into a pool of water, and there's a ripple effect that comes from you jumping in. You do a cannonball and it spreads out. It takes a minute for that to kind of ease and for the calm to come back. What you have to understand is that the wind and these waves obeyed immediately. And so there wasn't like, okay, the wind stopped, everything calmed down. I'm not sure exactly how that happened. No, let me tell you something. It was such a miracle at the voice of Jesus that nature obeyed immediately. That they everything just went calm. It was amazing. The men were amazed. Now you have to understand, they are taken back. They're like, how did this happen? He spoke. And this happened. And nature, the wind and the waves, they obeyed Him. And so they raise this all-important question, and they say, what kind of man is this? They had not settled it yet. They had not fully understood yet. They had not, and even if they had seen it and experienced it in other situations, this was a personal experience, and now they're beginning to understand the Jesus that we are following. What kind of man is this That's very important to moving from little faith to great faith. They said, even the winds and the waves obey him. See, Jesus did what the disciples could not do. He spoke. He spoke to the wind and the waves. He rules over nature. Nature obeys him. And they experience the calm that can only come by what only Jesus can do. And it literally amazed them. I think it's a good thing to be amazed at who Jesus is. It should increase our faith, not limit it. What kind of man is Jesus? They said, what kind of man is this Jesus that we are following, that we're on this boat with, that we have woken up? What kind of man is he? I think you and I should raise such a question, because if we'll answer it honestly, based on the Scripture, and we understand that Jesus is God, do you think that'll take care of your fear? What were your top 3 fears? What fear will Jesus show you that you have that you don't even realize that you have? Can he handle that? The answer is yes. If you can answer the question, what kind of man is this? The man that can handle literally every fear we have. Even the ones that say, you're about to die if something doesn't change. He can handle those. It's beautiful. It's amazing. It's life-changing. And you and I, we must understand who we are following. And when we understand who we're following, it changes everything. And when we understand that we're following him, if he wants to form us in the following, we'll let him do it. Because the storms of life are not a detour. They are the path of development that he chooses to give us. That's very important. Ray Pritchard raises a question and he answers it. I thought it was so good I want to share it with you. He said, how do you get the faith that enables you to survive the storms of life? Isn't that what we want? How do we get that? He said, the only answer to get is to get in the boat with Jesus and ride with him wherever he wants you to go. Where there are no storms, there are no dangers. Where there are no danger, there is no fear. And where there's no fear, there is no testing. And where there's no testing, there is no learning. And where there's no learning, there is no growing. And where there's no growing, there is no faith. And how true it is. Getting in the boat with Jesus means giving up your right to be in control. There's no shortcuts or pathways to spiritual growth. He knows that oftentimes the spiritual growth that comes, that sticks, that changes us to help us understand who it is that we're following and how we can fully trust him with all of our lives, is he's got to put us in a situation where we see him for who he is and he brings out every fear that we have. Is Christ in your boat today? Can he still the storm that is stirring in your heart? I would say to you, if we never experienced fear and uncertainty, we would be God. If we never understood if we could understand everything and did not need to grow, we would be God. But let me give you a news flash. We are not God. Therefore, when Jesus says get in the boat, we ought to get in. And we ought to trust him. Why do we struggle to trust Jesus fully? I think the answer to that is simply this, because we struggle to give up control. We struggle. We want to be in control. We want to know the plan, where we're going, what we're doing, and we don't want to show any fear. We're resilient. We're strong. Nothing wrong with us. Lord, look what I'm going to do for you. Lord looks, no. I appreciate you serving me, Mark, in these ministries as a young man. But let me show you what I'm going to do in you so that you truly can serve me. That's more important than what I thought I would do for him. You know, if you were to go and say, you know, I want a parachute, put a parachute on, I want to jump out of a plane, and I want to skydive, somewhere along in that process, you got to give up control. You either got to trust the pilot, and then if you choose to jump, you got to trust your equipment. You may have some training, or you may even jump with an expert. But somewhere you're going to trust that the equipment you have is actually going to do what you believe it's going to do. And at that moment, when you jump and you pull and the chute opens, you're saying, I am trusting in this parachute. I'm trusting my equipment. And I'm going to tell you what the problem is. We don't trust the fact that Jesus says, I'll be your everything. I've got you. And it's a fearful place to stay there. It's a fearful place if we can't trust Him. And fear will consume you, and it will literally take your life if you let it. What He says is, listen, you got to trust, I've got you. I'm going to take care of you. I want to give you a few final questions to consider. What storms has Jesus placed you in and brought you through in your life? Just take a moment and think about that. You know, hindsight's 20/20. Maturity is wisdom. You look back and you go, I look back over here and I never thought I would get through that. But when I'm honest and I look back, I see where Jesus brought this person along, or Jesus met my need, or Jesus gave me perspective. And can you look back and see the faithfulness of God in your life? If you can, you need to hold on to that, because whatever you're facing today, He has not forgotten you. And what storm He has you in today is the storm that you need and the storm that I need, that He puts me in, so that I will be a person not of little faith, but of great faith. The next question I want to ask you is this: is Jesus faithful and capable? Is He? Is He? I believe He is. I know He is. I just have to trust that. And that's a daily choice that I have to make. And it's a daily choice you have to make. When you answer this question, is Jesus faithful and capable, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Would you say, well, 10 all the way. I believe Jesus is faithful. Does that bear forth in your actions? Do you really trust Him? Because when you trust Him, what will happen is the calm will come, because you know Jesus is in the boat. Think about it as a parent. If you're here today and you're a parent, there is an instinct inside of you as a parent to always protect your children, right? I knew that as a parent. I always wanted to protect my kids. And this is why this whole thing about in the boat with Jesus, storm coming, about to die, doesn't make sense to us, because we think if Jesus loves us, He'd always protect us, right? Instead, He said, I'm going to let some storms come so that you'll look to me and that you'll have faith and know, yes, I'm going to take care of you even in the storm. But that's why it's so confusing to us. See, Jesus is wise enough to place us in the storm so we realize we're not in control, but He is. I'm going to give you some very practical advice in conclusion of everything that we've looked at. And here it is. Some of us just need to go down in the bottom of the boat and take a nap with Jesus. That's it. Just go rest with Him. Just go rest with Him. You know what we're doing? We're on the top. We're up there bailing the water, thinking we're going to get out of it somehow, while we blame Jesus for not caring. We do better to go to the bottom of the boat and simply take a nap with Jesus. And what's so interesting to me when I think about this whole thing is, it is in the fulfillment of His promise to make these men fishers of men. That's why He's doing it. He wasn't doing it just to say, well, look what great faith they have. Man, they're really some of the most dynamic, men on the sea today on the lake. Look at these guys. Man, there's something. Had nothing to do with that. He was strengthening their faith in who He was so they could do what He's asking them to do, and that is to fish for men. And so when you find them in the book of Acts and they're out there and they're being persecuted and told stop to preach and all this, let me tell you something. They're remembering. You remember that night on the boat, boys? You remember that He calmed the storm? And now we're in this persecution storm. I'm trusting Him. I got the faith to trust Him. I'm going to keep preaching the gospel. Don't forget, What his main goal was to increase their faith and understanding of who he was so that they could fish for the souls of men. Will you let him develop you in that way so you can fish too? Let's go to the Lord in prayer.